All right. So we can start with Supriya's question.
Um, Sorry, Tejaswini, if you want to post this, do you want to do a little intro first? If you're going to post a video online, or you think it's not necessary?
I have no intro prepared, so I guess I will just go with it.
Never mind. We'll jump in.
Yes, let's just jump in. So Supriya's question is, what are the ingredients of a good contemporary Indian murder mystery that distinguish it from the cozies of the past and based in other settings?
So I'll tell you what I feel as a reader, and that's also what I tried to get into the book. Um, I think characters is a big part of it. I wanted my characters to talk and act like real people. And I feel like a lot of books, the dialogue is somewhat stilted. People don't talk like that in real life. And there's a very big difference in the speech rhythms of, for instance, a younger person versus someone older, or what kind of language they're used to, and a lot of things like that. So that I wanted to get as um, convincing. I won't say accurate. You don't want it to be exactly like real life, because that would be very boring. The way most of us talk in real life, we use a lot of fillers and we repeat ourselves and all of that. So not that, but like more edited version of that, right? And have different characters talk differently. I feel like that's also something that I find sometimes jarring in books. So every character speaks the same, they use the same phrases, which is not how we talk in real life, especially people with no connection with each other. If it's a group of close friends, you might all use the same phrasing because you're used to, you pick it up from each other. So those things I was careful with. Um, what languages is each character speaking in? Because if you're writing a novel set in India, they're not all speaking in English all the time. And some of the time I was careful to clarify what language they're speaking in. Some of the time I didn't, but I tried to keep that in mind while I was writing dialogue. Um, yeah, I think a lot of it is about the characters and how they speak and how they behave. Um, like the attitudes to everything really, but like especially things like sexuality, since that's a big part of the book, would be very different if you set a book in contemporary India versus if you set a book in the past. um, and by sexuality I don't just mean queerness, that's part of it, but also um, I'm going to talk with no spoilers, with spoilers here, unless there's anyone here who doesn't want it, because I'm assuming that most of you have read the book. But if you want me to avoid spoilers, I will. I mean, I'm not going to say anything major, but still, like, it's easier if I don't have to be careful about that. Like Shweta having casual sex and casual dating, like, there's no judgment in the book, which some people find surprising. But if in a certain kind of sphere, that's very common. So, those things I try to be careful about. The other thing is, of course, the setting itself. What does Bangalore look like, or what did it look like in 2019, which is when the book is set? So this is pre-pandemic, but it's not a long time ago. Um, so, what did the neighborhoods look like? What kind of technology is everyone using? So all of those things, trying to be as true to the time period as well as to the financial situation of the characters also. Where does each character afford to live? And like I saw like this very nice review on Goodreads of the book, where it talked about how Shweta lives can afford to live nearby, and Nilima lives in Ulsur, and she could not afford to live in Jayanagar, and even if she could afford to, would Jayanagar accept her? Which I thought was such an interesting comment. That, like, so that kind of thing, which I feel like at the beginning when I started writing, I hadn't quite figured out, and it took multiple iterations and a lot of research on Bangalore to get those things right. Um, And while you don't have to be 100% accurate, I feel like as a writer, sorting those things out in your own head makes a lot of difference to how convincing you can make the setting feel. You don't have to be 100% accurate. If you get the some things right, readers will extrapolate the rest, right? But it has to be plausible, if not, 100% based on reality. Does that answer your question?
I think also like the next question I had, I think which I had sent out, as the city being the setting. So yeah, all of it is makes a lot of sense because for me it's Bombay, and which also has similar like divides in where you can afford to stay and things like that, and how there's one character in my novel who is from Delhi and is like a Urdu shire, and who kind of when everyone else is still talking in English. I've written most of his dialogue in Hindi, and I was not sure what to like do with that, whether to keep it
Right. Yeah.
because that's kind of what a defining characteristic of this person, like the character. But it's
Yeah, I
nice to
think
know
this.
that you can have that like different.
Yeah. So you could write bilingually. I don't think that's, a very big problem. You could leave it untranslated or you could translate it. What you could also do is what a lot of movies do, right? When they set a scene in like a foreign country, which is, outside America or where people don't speak English. At first, they show you the character speaking in the local language and then they switch to English. And as viewers you get that they're continuing to speak in the local language. This is just for our convenience, right? So something like that. There, I mean, whichever works for you. I think one thing that I do quite often is put in a few words
Yeah.
in whichever language the character is supposed to be speaking. So if you don't know the word, and never translate it, so if you don't know the word, you still from the context understand what they're talking about, but it gives an air of like it makes it seem more real, and to the audience, to the reader, this signals what language they're talking in. um, so yeah, I think there are many ways to approach that. It's more challenging to do this, but I feel like that's part of the fun, right? Because our lives are also multilingual. Almost all of us talk more than one language, like on a regular basis. So it's nice to have our books reflect that versus like fiction, which does not reflect that, where you're like, I don't know what language these characters are speaking in. Because if you're like in Bangalore, you'd hear Kannada and English and also Hindi and also Tamil and, and Nilima's having a conversation in Assamese, and like there are several scenes where there are conversations going on in multiple languages. And in Bombay, you would have English and Hindi and Marathi for sure.
Yeah.
And probably like there'll be you.
Uh,
I mean, I'm just talking about you go out and you overhear people talking in Gujarati, and I mean those are the most common languages. And anyway, not to like go on about it, but I think that's also it's interesting for me to think about characters in terms of what language is this character most comfortable with, and are they speaking in that language right now or are they speaking in another language, which is something that we negotiate every day.
yeah. And then a lot of the times that English also sounds like translated, which also I find very
Yes, so that affects your dialogue. Are they thinking in English or are they thinking in a different language and translating that into English? And even then, even if everyone's talking in English, the English is very dependent on where you've learned it and who you're surrounded by.
mm,
That is very interesting.
true.
Sure. Rohini's back. Okay, so the next question is from Nadia. She says, how do your stories find you? There are other
Um,
two more questions which are related to community, so I'll club them together next. So
yeah, I know. I remember the question. Um, so this one, it's different for every story. This one came out of a writing workshop I was doing in Bangalore. and it was literally an assignment I did for the workshop. And I we were supposed to write something based on, because it was a Bangalore based the class, that specific class was on research, and we were supposed to write something based on research of old Bangalore. And I was feeling very competitive, and I felt that of all the people in the class, I'm least qualified to do this because I'm not from Bangalore. And therefore I tried to approach it in different ways, and then I realized it's best to go after what you know. So I don't think write what you know is always valuable advice for a writer, because you don't want to end up only writing memoirs. Like, it can be very self absorbed and therefore boring. Um, but it's a good starting point. So for me, I felt like what I know of Bangalore, which is different from other people probably, is the fiction I've read about the city, or fiction I'd read set in the city. So therefore, I wrote this character who's new to Bangalore and feeling insecure about it, proposing a literary tour of the city. And that's where it started, and that's where the three characters came from. And I based them again, like, I did think about the characters a little bit, not very much because I wasn't planning to write a book, but just in terms of, I haven't seen young queer women in fiction, which is surprise in Indian fiction, which was surprising to me. And therefore, that's who I decided to make my characters. At least Nilima, she was named something else at the time, but I don't think I'd figured out the sexuality of the other characters. But Nilima, to me, from the beginning, like, she was queer. So that's where it came from. The core of the book always to me was these three women and the relationships between them. And because Zakoya, the thriller writer, was my instructor for that class, couple of classes, another assignment I did, another scene with those three characters, and it was his idea to turn this into a thriller. I mean, and yeah, so that's sort of where it came from. I think it came um, like, the inspirations were very much A, Bangalore, and B, um, queer people in general wanting to write queer characters, because I was reading at the time a lot of queer fiction set in other countries, but there wasn't much based in India. And I've always loved murder mysteries. And I wanted to do like an updated, current, contemporary version of like an Agatha Christie. So that's where this one came from. I'd have different answers for everything else that I'm working on.
Okay, would you mind talking about those other things and how those stories have come to you without like giving us too much detail?
Sorry, sorry. Okay. Sure. The fantasy novel I'm working on currently is based on a short story I wrote. And that short story was based on a dream, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but I basically had a dream and I got up and I wrote it down. And now I don't remember how much of it was in the dream, whether it was like 90% or like 10%, but like some a big part of it, like the idea of it, definitely came from the dream. Um, which is funny, right? Like, you feel like that doesn't happen, but I think this is like an I've like my short story that was shortlisted from the for the Deodar Prize in 2023, that also came from a dream. um, but I think that's like your subconscious working on themes that you're already thinking about. The fantasy novel is based on a lot of my memories of growing up in Assam. So there's that. And then, of course, it becomes bigger than that. Like, there's part of it that's set in Bombay, and there's queerness in it, and lots of different things I'm trying to do. Um, there's a literary fiction novel that I've sort of completed for a couple of years now, but like, I mean, I did some rewrites and now it's with my agent. Um, which came from thinking about parental control, really, of grown up adult but young women, or adults in general, which is like something that's very seems very specific to our society, right? um, so I was thinking about that, and um, I wasn't sure at first what form it would take, and then it expanded and slowly grew bigger than that. So the parental control part is still there, but there's also like a little bit of politics in it. There's anti-government protest. There's um, relationships and as a team, and anyway, a lot of other things. So I think where you start and where you go with it might be very different. Ideas are easy to have, honestly. It's like just working on it until it becomes something more coherent to someone else. That's the tricky part. It's really fun to get a new idea, like for a bit, like, oh, I thought of something really cool, and you write it out, but it doesn't make sense to anyone else until you've spent a lot of time on it.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. In fact, many writers also do dream journals, like just
Mhm.
keep a book next on your bedside table or something, and then whatever dreams you get, you just jot them down first thing in the morning. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good resource, I think.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of writing happens when you're not consciously writing. So a lot of times late at night or in the middle of the night, I will think of something, especially when I'm taking a break from a project, from a novel. Like for a week or two, it will be fine. And then after that, I will start getting like thoughts about it, like not necessarily new ideas, but like, oh, this should also happen in this novel or to this character. And that's when I know that it's time to go back and work on it.
Yeah, time away definitely works. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, since we are talking about how things happen in our heads, this question from Roshni is I want to understand Unmana's journey as a writer when she worked on this book. What were all the voices in your head and what did you pay heed to?
I think I've answered some of that already. I think the main voice in my head was Nilima's. She felt like a very compelling character, and I think that made me keep working on the book. Um, I feel like anything I'm writing, a novel I'm writing becomes real at the point where that voice becomes real. When I know how this character, uh, what they're saying to themselves, not necessarily out loud, not necessarily to other people, but when I feel like I have a sense of how their voice will sound like in the book. Um, like, will it be, like a mix of serious or snarky, or like what kind of, what are they feeling, what are they thinking, how do they think? And I feel like that's when I feel, okay, this is, that's when it becomes real, right? That's when an idea becomes real. And um, then for a while I'm so much in that world of the novel that it's hard to come out. um, while I'm actively working on it, it's very hard to detach. It's very hard to take an interest in anything else, because, yeah, because of that voice and what's going on there. Which is not answering the question. I think the voice, yeah, the voice was very much Nilima's. It wasn't like there were competing voices. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while. I started writing this novel in 2017. Um, and to some extent the voice was Purna's, I think, who at the beginning I don't think I knew that she would be such an important character. Like Nilima, I think Purna won me over also, because the as I wrote the story, it became very clear to me that um, this is the relationship, that this is actually the most important relationship in the book in some ways. Um, and it balances out the ambiguity as well as the romantic aspect of the relationship with Shweta. And this is where this relationship also like sort of exemplified how Nilima needs to, every character through the book has to, especially your main character, has to learn and grow. That's the conventional wisdom. You don't necessarily have to follow it, but mostly it does make a book more satisfying. And for me, Nilima's learning to learning and growing was learning to trust people, learning to um, work with people she didn't like, learning to judge people better and not very instinctively, like you're, without good reason. And so for all of those reasons, I think Puna also like took up a lot of my attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is interesting. I tend to struggle with getting into the character's head. So this has been very helpful. Thank you. Roshni's next question is, how did you know when the book was ready to be published?
I think we missed the question about the writing groups. Was that not part of the
Yeah.
earlier?
Yeah, Nadia's questions
Oh,
was,
you want to go back to it? All
I
right.
thought we
Sorry,
would
I'll let you.
deal with the writing questions first and then we can go.
Makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, so how did you know when the book was ready to be published? Was this the version you were most content with?
I didn't know the book was, I mean, I thought the book was ready to be published in 2018, which was when I started sending it out. Um, and I'm very glad it was not published yet, because it's a much, much better book now. The whole process of like, I rewrote it like twice every year for those 5 years, and it was extremely frustrating. But I feel like it taught me to write, it taught me how to structure a novel. There's really no way to do it except by doing it, you know. And I do feel this is the best version of the novel, yes. um, Especially because one of the last rewrites, not after, so after it went to the publisher, we did like a thorough copy edit, but we didn't do any major changes. But before that, my last rewrite before that was when I went to Bangalore and did more research and got a lot of the setting in, which was in, because I wrote most of the book here in Bombay, A, and B, because I am a lazy writer and writing down descriptions and settings I found very boring. um, to, I would just write like the conversation and the action and move on. Even though a lot of the setting was in my head already, I could visualize it, but I hadn't written a lot of it down. But I went back to Bangalore for like 4 weeks. I went around, I changed a lot of things. Like we talked about setting in the beginning, and I changed some things about, for instance, where Nilima lives. Um, I added a couple of scenes in different parts of the city. So all of that was based very much on like being in Bangalore and looking at different areas of the city. Look, um, just writing down my observations and feelings about being in the city. So a lot of it came in the last rewrite. So yeah, I definitely think this was the best version.
Yeah, that's a journey from 2017 to when I'm like 20.
24, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Divya is not here, but they had asked an interesting questions, which is story behind the title of the book, please. And also, while we're at it, the story behind the chapter titles.
So, Chikkamma means Masi in Kannada. So literally small aunt. Chik is small and Amma. Um, and from the beginning, even when I just had like one scene for the assignment, I had named it Chikkamma Tours, the tour agency, just because it sounded fun. And my backstory in my head, which is not in the book, because I feel like it's I didn't want to. If anything that I felt like if I explain, it will slow things down, I did not explain, or where it didn't feel necessary for the reader to know the backstory. So Shweta's grown up in Bangalore, and then she gets married and she moves to Bombay for some 6 years or so, and then she comes back, right? So she left as a very young woman, and she's comes back and she's 30 or so now. And she's changed a little bit, and the city's changed. And so like I had this idea like that she went when she went away, she was Akka, she was Didi, and now she's Chikama. And it's jarring for her, right? Like it's a change, but then she decides to claim it instead of fighting it. And this idea of this your friendly aunt showing you around the city. So that was the idea behind the title. um, I wasn't sure it was Chikkamma Tours I had at first, and Zach suggested adding the private limited. Um, and it was, yeah, it was a fun title, even though it's somewhat confusing because you have the tour agency and you have a bookstore, and it's um, not a travel book at all. And I think the cover does a good job of communicating that. Um, Otherwise, it might have been confusing. The chapter titles are actually all of each chapter title is based on a classic or a very well known um, mystery or noir book. So I took a title and I changed it a little bit. So the first one, the prologue, is called Evil Outside the Door, and Agatha Christie's Evil Under the Sun. So every chapter title is like that. The second one is based on The Body in the Library, again by Christie. There's a lot of Christie in there. Uh, Number four is there's a Georgette Hare mystery called Blunt Instrument. So like that. I thought it would be like a. I mean, it was fun for me, to be honest. Like most of the, if you ask me for most things, why did I do this? Because it was fun for me, and I feel like that is the best reason to do something, because you're not sure while you're working whether it will ever see the light of day. So it's important to make it interesting enough and entertaining enough for yourself. And also, honestly, if you enjoy it, then some other people will also.
Mhm. Yeah. No fun for the writer, no fun for the reader, they say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is definitely interesting because it's a mystery in itself, like figuring out which book you're referring to so that you
Yeah,
can.
I considered having like the answers at the end, but that seemed too nerdy and also unnecessary. You can figure it out.
Yeah, no, no. If you like to add to my TBR list, we can just keep figuring out what is this, then I would have earned it.
Yeah, I also wanted to be very sure I was only adding books I read, because there sometimes I like there were a couple of titles I thought of which the titles were interesting and I wanted to use them, but I hadn't read those books, and therefore like it didn't make sense to use. So yeah.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so we can now go to Nadia's questions about community, which is, are you part of any queer writing groups or community? Do you ever write or read in community? And how does it impact your work or your drafts?
So I think I've already answered part of that. This book came out of a writing course, so it was very much like, you know, came from that kind of environment. I would never have thought of this story. I would never have written this book if I hadn't been in like a writing class. Um, since And I have like often found writing classes, sustained ones, not so much like the one time classes, but where you spend time working on one thing over a course of a few weeks or something. I found those very useful. I think one time ones can also be useful, but it's a very different kind of environment. um, so yeah, like I've you know both in terms of um, they're generative in terms of ideas, because you work on, like, especially ones that make you work on stuff, like give you prompts and you have to do assignments, and sometimes you come up with something that you didn't know you had inside you. um, I looked very hard for a writing group in my youth, but I never found one that worked for me. um, they were rarer then, and also they were mostly in person and not online. So um, So yeah, that I think I would have found it very useful if I had found it earlier. Um, one of the actually, there are two people who are here who have who three people actually. Is Anshi still here? No.
And
Okay,
not
two
here.
people who
Three
like
people now.
run groups that
Three
I'm
people.
part of, right? So Tejaswini set up this writing hour, which meets twice a day now, where you just meet online and you write. I don't do that anymore. I have attended that once in a while a few years ago. I don't do that anymore because I have very little need for group stimulation, and given the, you know, given the kind of events I've done in the last year or so, I feel like what I need more is alone time to work on my stuff. I don't. I think part of the need for groups is also a form of validation that, this is important, your work is important, and here are other people who understand the importance of it. Because it's very hard to explain to anyone who's not a writer that you're working on something for months and years before you have anything to show for it, and you might never have something to show for it. Like, it doesn't necessarily work out, and everything you work on will not work out. But since I got published, I feel less of a need for that kind of validation. So I've mostly been working alone. Rohini, who's also here, runs a queer book club that I love. They do monthly events in Bangalore and online. I'm like a hybrid event. I haven't attended one in a long time, but the WhatsApp group is great for discussions. And they always read, every month they'll read a new queer book. And yes, Rohin is saying we are called Queer Reads Bangalore. You can find them on Instagram. So yeah, those are two groups that I'm part of. I do now most of my writing by myself. I It's always nice though to have people to talk about with your work. So I have that, but not in group settings. I do it one on one with several writer friends. We talk about our work, and sometimes get feedback, but more than feedback, I think what you need is some form of validation, like I'm struggling with this and this is hard. Like, I think just that is it's important to have people to say that to, and who will say yes, it's hard, but you should keep going, or something like that.
Yeah, also the company, for me, it helps to have like somebody.
Yeah,
Uh,
the accountability of it, right? Like, when I did do these kinds of the writing hour, and there was this writer who used to run, like, I've done a couple of different forms of writing online together, and those hours are the most productive. Like, you it's very hard to slack off when there are other people, you know, you're supposed to be writing, otherwise you're like, I can do this later, I can do something else now, so that way it's very useful.
nice. Okay, Gurpreet has shown up, so I will just read her questions. Um, how do we? Okay, so Priya is logging off. Looking at me. All right. Thank you for
A
joining.
couple minutes.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
I'll just
Okay. Gurpreet's question is: how do we do queer writing, or what is queer about queer writing?
Hmm. I think the first question is, what is queer writing at all, right? Um, I I think if you have, and this is very loosely defined, because sometimes books are called queer books when there's a minor character who's queer, which I think is not fair. Uh, and I feel like we tend to define, because of the state of books, we tend to define queer writing as anything that is as in opposition to straight writing, right? Um, so my definition is at least one of the main characters has to be queer. If it's fiction, non-fiction is a whole other thing. You can apply like a similar lens to it, I suppose. Um, what is queer about queer writing is a very interesting question, because then your question is it enough to make a book queer to have one queer main character? And I don't know about you, but I've been very frustrated by books that do that, that have one queer person who does not seem to talk to, interact with any other queer people, which seems ridiculous, because that's not how our lives are. Um, if you have, and I think that's something that I followed very much in Chikkamma. If you are a queer person, you will have queer community. It might be a very small community. Like Nilima is not a very social person, but you will still have queer community. And I think it's important to show. So I can, I don't want to comment on what makes queer writing. I can tell you what I was doing that I thought was queer. And one was to have multiple queer characters with different relationships with each other. Um, Multiple queer characters who have very different personalities. So if you isolate, that also I think takes off the risk of having stereotypes, because if you have one character from a community, it's very hard to not um, they hold too much weight. They have to be too many things for too many people, right? Um, so that, and having Nilima having different kinds of relationships. Yes, having a crush, but that's not her friendships with other queer people, I feel, are the most queer thing about the book, which was part of what I said about, Purna being important as a character, because part of, and as a writer, knowingly, unknowingly, your value system will always show up in your work. So it's good to do that consciously, deliberately, rather than um, unknowingly, right? And one thing that I believe is that romantic relationships are not necessarily the most important kinds of relationships, right? And therefore, I felt like it was important to show Nilima with other people, having relationships with other people, having multiple friendships, and also developing friendships through the course of the book. Um, the other thing I thought I wanted to take like a queer approach to was, most murder mysteries at least have a very lone hero sort of narrative, that there is one, the traditional murder mystery especially has like one detective who knows everything, who's smarter than everyone else, and who solves the case single-handedly. um, and my heroine freezes when something difficult happens, right? She panics when there's physical danger, and that is a terrible trait for that kind of a hero to have. But I wanted to show that she doesn't have to do everything, and also that that is not how queer people work. That's not how queer women especially work. And this is a collaboration. This is the team who are helping each other. So I felt that was a very queer approach to murder mysteries.
I
Um,
find that very endearing about Nilima, the way she would panic or freeze. Yeah, very relatable.
yeah, I think I based that very much on myself. I would be useless in a fight. Like I wouldn't know what to do, and I felt like, and that's something that like you are told not to do, as you can't, like, you have to make your hero, your protagonist, the protagonist. And I'm like, no, because that's not necessarily the only heroic quality. Nilima has other strengths. And
Mm.
it made sense therefore to, and I feel like now the way the climax stands, again, maybe I won't spell it out because I'm not sure if everyone's read it, but the way the climax stands right now, I love it. I love the, how Nilima has to be rescued, and I love who does the rescuing, you know
Mm.
um, what was the second part of the question? How do we do queer writing? What is queer about queer writing? Okay, I think I've answered that.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I sort of really like the way that you were sort of pointing towards the complexity that holds in this uh, queer character arc, as almost like, right? Like it's not like a mystery novel will have that. So it almost lends a very humaneness to the queer character or queering of the character itself, right? Right. So I was thinking in that sense, uh, and I think the second point that you really bring up beautifully is, and I think that stands out for me, uh, is the breaking down of the relationship hierarchies, right? So, and I think that's one, like I'm still yet to read the book, but how much ever I've heard from you and from other folks, I think that's really helpful to think about queerness in character writing and storytelling. I feel both.
Yeah, so I have two things to say in response to that. One is like what you said at the end. I wanted to say that I'm not very interested in writing romance.
Mm.
I find it, I don't know, yeah, like it left to me, like, if it was completely, what I like doing, I wouldn't have developed the romance much at all, because that in itself is not interesting to me. But given our contemporary fiction landscape, given how little romance we have between queer people, queer women especially, I wanted to take that seriously. That whether or not it works out is a separate thing, but this can't just be. And characters like Nilima, right? If you ever meet them in fiction, they're usually the butt of the joke. And like Nilima cannot be the butt of the joke. Nilima is the hero. So her desire has to be taken seriously at the very least by the narrative, by me as the author. So I worked very hard on that aspect. Uh, Even though that was, I mean, it's in some ways that's a political decision and not so much a, writing decision, but I think those are related. I was
Yeah.
I was very consciously thinking of who's going to read the book, or who do I
Yeah.
want to read the book. And I didn't want them to be like, we as queer readers, we are very used to coming to books that mainstream media that disappoints us in the representation. And I wanted to not do that. I wanted to not betray the reader. So that was a very conscious effort. Like when I started writing, I wasn't sure what I would do with that relationship, and like whether it would stay a crush, it would develop more, or what would happen. Um, but as I started writing, making it into a novel, and I realized what I was doing was writing one, like, you know, writing a novel that's very different from what's available in Indian fiction today. So I was I took that responsibility to like counter that narrative very seriously. The other thing was what I already said about people working together and queer women working together. Murder mystery is not a realistic sort of genre, right? But within that, I wanted to be as realistic as possible. If you accept the fact of, okay, the murder mystery as sort of the template or the container for the really the lives of these characters, nothing we do in real life that is worthwhile is done alone. Anything important that you want to do, It may not be solve a murder, but I think very much making a better world in whatever form, you have to collaborate with other people. And therefore, that's the main lesson my heroine has to learn. And therefore, that's also how they manage to triumph. They have to work together.
That is so beautifully said. And it is so true. Hmm. So we did talk a little bit about writing practice on communities, but I'm still curious about your own individual, writing practice. How have you created it? Having tried group settings, etc., and now settled on this, how does it work for you?
Well, I'm very privileged and lucky right now to not have to work for a living. So I treat this like my day job. I try to write every day, every morning, even if I'm not writing, because sometimes writing doesn't really work, but then I'll be doing research, I'll be doing something around, like this is my primary job. That makes it easier in a way. Like I follow like a regular work day and then I'm done. And sometimes it will be longer, sometimes it will be shorter, but mostly like I follow the rhythm of the regular work week. When I had like day jobs, it was much more difficult, and I would write when I can. I would try to write in the mornings, and I would try to write on weekends. But um, yeah, that's much harder. I think the important thing is to keep coming back to it. The problem with this, I feel like no one prepares you for how hard it is and how long it takes. Because a lot of the conventional wisdom about writing is, oh, it's fun and you have to do it every day. And if you're a writer, you will enjoy it, which makes me very mad because that's not how it works. Um,
Yeah.
no, no work, if you take it seriously, will always be fun. Parts of it will be fun, sure. Usually the fun part is, like we talked about, coming up with a new idea and then actually fleshing it out and finishing is it's terrible most of the time. I am complaining about it all the time while I'm doing it, but it's also very satisfying when you get it right, which is why we do it.
Mhm.
um,
The writing landscape is so bad. Like the fact that you get to write is a big deal. So, and then going from there, yeah.
Yeah, I was just like, there's this article I'll send, I'll maybe share a link which talked about the publishing landscape that I'm quoted in. But basically, that it's so hard to be a writer, to get published. I mean, not to like discourage any of you, but it's it's very rare for people to make a living from writing.
We're all very stubborn as well. So I guess
That's
that's,
that's a very good quality. I'm very stubborn. I think that's the only thing that
yeah.
that works. And the other thing is,
Thank you.
again, like I wouldn't advise anyone to adopt writing as a goal, right? Because it's not a rational thing to want to do with your life. But if you feel compelled to do it anyway, then how do you make it easier, right? That's what all of these writing communities and tips and process and all of that helps. And I think one of the things is like the thing that I have learned is that you need to treat it as play in some ways. Like I said, like what do you want to work on? Like if it's something that you will spend like maybe the next 5 years of your life, it has to be interesting enough and compelling enough for you to want to do that. So how can you make it as interesting for you as possible? What is the book that you wish you could read but doesn't exist? There's a very famous Toni Morrison quote that says something like that, right? Like if a book you want to read doesn't exist, write it. And that's absolutely why I wrote Chikkamma, because I felt like this was what I wanted to read and it wasn't there. And like if and throughout I kept feeling like I may be writing something that's too niche and that's only someone like me would appreciate. But that's fine, do it for you and it will find other people like you. And I feel like a lot of what we try to do is we try to imitate what we read, which is very natural. But I think it's also important to see the gaps in what you're reading, what does not exist. And
Hmm.
therefore, are you well placed to write it.
Right.
Can I ask a related question,
Yeah.
Tejaswini? Is that okay?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, because you're talking about writing, and I'm thinking a lot about writing right now. I also wanted to ask, like you alluded to, people saying that practice makes you better at writing. So I wanted you to talk a bit more about that, because this is the advice that I've also got, that, just like, I don't know, write 300 words every day. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. And um, I don't know if that works or not, but I can imagine that, like, I don't know, in theory, I feel like it it should work. And also, I've been thinking about this, that how we are somehow constantly writing in general, because we're constantly texting people, texting our friends, telling them stories, updating them about our lives on text, which is writing, more writing and less talking. But then I was thinking that, because I also read your newsletter, and I also have like other friends who also, have newsletters, and I really marvel and appreciate it, like the fact that, like, you have a fully formed thought there, like, it has a beginning, and then it has like a middle, and then it has an end. And that sometimes I wish, like, I don't know, I could do. And it just feels like a very worthwhile exercise also in writing. And yeah, I just, in terms of practice, and the ease with which, probably, I don't know, at some point it starts coming to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, answering your first question first, practice absolutely makes you better. I feel like I'm a much better writer now than I was a few years ago. Um, and I feel like there's like this overemphasis on writing as like innate talent, and that you have the voice or you don't, and all of that. And some of that is maybe true. I'm not saying it's not, but there's a lot of that that you can develop and that you do develop with practice. If you read a certain kind of book a lot, you start writing like that, right? If you're reading a lot of academic books, you'll start to write like a textbook, which may or may not be good for you depending on what you're trying to do. But I think, uh, like just like that, I think it's, if you keep writing, I don't know if writing anything, I know that advice, and I know a lot of people follow it. I think Tejaswini might be better placed to answer to that. But for me, I've always found it more useful to write to a specific end, to have like a specific project that I spend time in. So you're um, working towards that, like, it's more for my own like level of boredom. Like if I'm writing like random journal entries or something, I get bored. I don't want to after a couple of days, you know so having like a more interesting, it's like making myself a playground to play in. So I find that then I want to keep getting back. I think it's very useful to have a goal, which is not to say you shouldn't, like a daily goal or something, which is not to say you shouldn't take breaks from it. But like 5 days a week, I'll do 300 words, or some a day or something like that. I think that kind of thing does help. It especially helps you get started. Once you've reached a certain point, I feel like the momentum tends to take over. And then when I have a break, then I have to start the process all over again. But after a break, if I'm writing, then it always helps to have like a, okay, I have to do like 300 words or 500 words or whatever today. And if you do that for a few days, it becomes a little easier. um the other thing you said is why I write in the first place, figuring out my own thoughts, especially with the newsletter. um I'm surprised sometimes when, like, the other day, a friend said, like, this thing in your newsletter helped me with my own relationship. And I was like, oh, cool. Okay. I don't really think about the reader when I'm writing, and I don't think you should necessarily. I'm just working things out in my own head, and I feel like for me, that's much easier to do when I'm writing than when I'm just, thinking aloud or whatever. And I think that's where writing helps. Like the newsletter helps with certain things, but um, the thing that I find interesting about novels is both because they're big and because they have multiple characters. There's so much more room for ambiguity and complexity in them, as opposed to, like, even in an essay, like in a short essay, you have to spell out exactly what you're thinking and your conclusions and all of that. And sometimes you may be ready to do that, and sometimes you may not, and sometimes you may be aware that this is too complex a topic for that, and different people might have different perspectives, and that's something that you can do in a novel without it being like preachy or didactic in any way. And I find that like a lot of the time while I'm writing, and this is maybe a writing tip if anyone wants it, I felt that the more I was talking about my life to friends or on Twitter or whatever, I found it harder to work on my actual writing. And if I avoided doing that, you have, like, at least for me, the way I started writing as a child was a lot of it came from loneliness and from like needing to articulate things to myself. And if you do that, if you just tweet whatever you're thinking, and I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, I'm just telling you how it worked for me. But like if I just tweeted like what I'm thinking on this specific topic or something, it's done, right? You don't want to revisit it. Versus if you put it as this character said this in a novel, you can work on it over a long time and develop that into something um, more complex. Some people can do both. For me, like once I'm done and I've said it once, I usually don't want to go back to it again. So in some ways, I restricted myself from being on social media very much, and that helped with my writing.
So being on social media is distracting for sure. So that it adds a lot of stuff in your head that you don't really intend to add to your head or your thought process, I guess. So
Yeah.
definitely helps. But about the writing everyday part, even me, I just have to write what's in my head. Otherwise, I feel like I don't understand my own thoughts.
Yeah.
And for many people, word count matters. But for me, I don't really care about how many words I have written. Also, because I'm not really working on a novel. So as long as I need to write until I'm like, okay, now I'm fine. Now I can whatever was in my head is out, and now I can go on living my life. Otherwise, then I stop. So yeah.
Yeah, I also feel it's important to focus on the process, not the outcome. So, like, you're writing for 20 minutes a day is better than you're writing 300 words a day.
Yeah,
You don't necessarily have to produce something, you have to spend time at it. That's what makes a practice, right?
exactly. Yeah, it's a good way to put it. Yes. Okay, we are over time, but there's one last question from Niyati, which is sequel launch date.
I mean, that's completely on me. I haven't finished it yet. I should not take a lot of time because I have most of the story done. But I've been working on other things since the book came out. Like I was working on the lit fic novel. Like I said, I've been working this year mostly on the fantasy novel, which I think should be done soon. And then I will get back to the sequel and finish it. Publishing takes its own time, so I would think at least a couple of years more from now. But maybe you will have something else from me before that.
Wow.
Wow.
That's super
Great
exciting.
news. Yeah. Yeah. Can I just jump in for one more, just following the conversation that about writing and practice, etc. Unna, you also mentioned about the reader, right? Like that you don't think so much about the reader when you are. So does that remain all through, or does the reader become more prevalent when you are maybe, for instance, editing or finalizing, or like, when does the reader emerge in the process of writing?
That's a very interesting question. So, my perspective on this is that it's impossible to completely anticipate what someone else will think. It's easier
Mm.
for me to know what I like. So, I think of myself as the imaginary reader, right? You do need other people's perspectives, which is where your beta readers and your editors come in. The trick there is that you don't have to, you shouldn't, or not just don't have to, but shouldn't follow everything they say. You want their reactions, but you want to decide whether this is a problem that you want to fix necessarily. You want to decide, if you do want to fix it, what's the solution, right? So some level of, like, you're immersed in this and therefore you will not have the best judgment or best perspective all the time. You do need other people to weigh in, but it's your vision. And if you disagree, like, if so for instance, there were a lot of things that I refused to change. There were, like, language edits I refused. There was, um, but I carefully considered everything, and a lot of things my editor pointed out were also things that it was clear in my head, but I hadn't completely explained it, or I had explained it in a previous version and it had gone by now. So that kind of thing, especially an editor or even a friend who does a close reading, can really help with. But I would say that's much, much later in the process. And it's also, yeah, like like, if someone tells you this didn't make sense to me, then you can think about it and decide whether you want to explain it more or not. But um, it's um, so every reader will react differently, right? So for me, by keeping, like, my own preferences in mind, it was like, I know what would work for me. It felt impossible to game it to work for someone I didn't know or anyone else, you know. And you should also be prepared for that nothing will work for everyone, and there are some things that won't work for people, and, like, even people who love your book may not love certain aspects of it. And what side do you want to come down on? For instance, I'm taking this as an example because this was most common. Like, there are a lot of places where I don't completely explain things, like, I wanted to keep, because I felt like slowing down to explain a lot of what's happening will make it boring for the reader who does get it, right? So, but it's up to you to decide which one do you want to prioritize. It's always a decision, and you will always lose one kind of reader. So, I wanted to prioritize something that would uh, have more complexity and also be probably then rewarding to reread.
Yeah, right. Mm. I think you're also pointing towards a balance that needs to be arrived at as we work through this, right? Like, as we work through reaching a final published version or whatever one is writing.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is also like what serves the story, and
Yeah.
what parts are you keeping because you want to show off or something. Like, those are also things that
Mhm.
you have to be careful while editing, right? There were
Yeah.
scenes that I loved, one character that I loved, whom I removed because I realized they were not doing anything for the story.
Mm. Right. Mm.
I guess it's also spending enough time with your story
Yeah,
yourself
Mm.
so
yeah,
that you are
Yeah.
convinced of what you want and what you don't want, so that you are ready to
Yeah.
take external thoughts, opinions, feedback, whatever it is.
yeah. I think it's very important to get other people's feedback, but the right kind of people. And you want
Mm.
feedback from people who are like, I love this, but this thing didn't work for me.
Mm-hmm. Right.
You don't want
Mm.
feedback from people, and you will get these people who are like, I don't get this at all. This whole thing didn't work for me. right?
Mm,
Which might happen, but then they're not your audience at all. Your audience is people
mm,
who already like what you're trying to do. And yeah,
yeah,
like that's who you need. You can't get everyone into your audience. You have to,
that's true.
focus on
Right.
people who want what
Yeah.
you're doing.
Mm.
Okay, we are 15 minutes above time. So I guess it's time to close. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Unmana, for being so amazing as usual and,
Yeah.
answering questions with so much thought and so much insight, like made me think so much. I'm like, yeah, jotting things down on and off.
Thank
So
you. This was really fun, and you all had like great questions. I enjoyed. I really enjoyed this.
Uh, Thank you so much, Tej,
Thank
Unmana,
you.
And
Wild.
thank you for putting this together, Tej, and she's not here, but
I'm
also.
missing Anshi, but yeah, she
Yeah.
and she has a power cut today. So yeah.
Oh, uh,
Anyways, so thank you so much, and
yes,
to have more of these things, and then we can
yes, yes.
chat and hang.
Yes.
Bye.
Bye.
And
Bye.
bye, bye, bye.